Story 1. A Big Responsibility. The little girl stood outside the door. She stared at it, fidgeting with the frills of her dress. She could always Washington it until tomorrow. No, she had to ask now. She wanted it, and she knew she wasn't going to change her mind any time soon. Stepping forward, she knocked on the door. Her small hand seemed to disappear in the shadow of the dark age wood. She heard a voice from behind the door. Come in. She reached up on her tippy toes to grab the handle of the door and turned it. The sheer weight on the door worked in her favor, and it swung open. She stepped through the open door into the brightly lit room. Inside, at the far end of the room, sat a large desk. At the large desk, a man. He was going over papers, shuffling them around a hand, making quick notations with a shiny silver pen. The girl marched up to the man sitting at the desk. I want a doggy, the little girl said, or rather, shouted at the man from the look on his face. This was not the first time they had had the conversation they were about to have again. Sweetheart, what did I tell you last time? He asked. The child was taken aback by the question. There was usually screaming on both sides by now. You said that I wasn't responsible enough last time, the unfortunate incident with the goldfish. Yes, and if you weren't able to take care of a goldfish, I'm not sure you'd be able to handle a dog. But, T.R.S. were welling in the young girl's eyes as she sputtered. The man, who was now facing her in his swivel chair, creaked the chair forward and held the child's face in his hands. Here's what we're gonna do, sweetheart. I am going to give you 2 weeks to prove how responsible you are, getting up for school, packing your own lunch, being in bed by bedtime. If you can do that for me without me having to remind you for 2 weeks, lines get you a dog. Her tiny face seemed to explode in sparkles of joy. You really mean it? Yes, but it's 2 whole weeks. That's 14 days. You think you can do it? She placed her hands square on her hips, her face scrunched in determination. Okay. The next 2 weeks were tense, and arguably the longest of her life so far. She cut it close, but he never had to remind her, with the exception of having to intervene when she tried to make peanut butter by smashing peanuts and margarine together with a hammer she found. Everything went surprisingly smooth. Daddy, 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 she shouted. Yes, the man answered, not looking up from his work at the desk. It's been 2 weeks, she said triumphantly, and the man asked, seeming to lead the witness, and I did everything you told me to. You did. He swiveled around in mock surprise. Yes, she smiled expectantly. I don't know. I think maybe we should go for another 2 weeks, just to be sure. The little girl's face fell. Oh, all right, the man scratched his chin. Now, what was I gonna get you? Oh, I remember. A baseball. Right, the girl laughed. No, Daddy, not a baseball. Well, then I was probably gonna get you a scooter. The girl laughed even harder. No, Daddy, not a scooter. He threw his hands up in mock exasperation. Well, if it's not a baseball and T's not a scooter, what could it possibly be? A doggy, the girl shouted. He smiled warmly at the girl. A doggy, of course. Let's get moving. Come on. To the pet store. Getting up from his desk, the man took the girl's small hand in his and lead her out of the room. They walked the length of the hallway and then made their way down the stairs to the first floor. The girl hummed a song she made up once on the first floor. The man led her to the door of the basement. A small plastic sign reading "Pet Store" hung next to the light switch. He opened the door to almost complete darkness, save for a small red light in the distance. He flicked the switch and light burst from the large panels that lined the ceiling, revealing a long staircase. At the bottom of the stairs was a steel door. Beside the door was a small keypad, a red light burning on its display. "Remember, sweetheart, it's a long way down, so watch your step," he warned her. Gingerly, he took the small girl's hand and guided her down the stairs. As she carefully maneuvered the steep steps, the girl thought about all the things she would do with her new dog. Playing catch, walks in the park. She hadn't even thought of what to name it. She was just so excited. Once they reached the imposing steel door, the man punched in a few numbers on the keypad. The sound of the beeps echoed. The red light on the keypad disappeared for a moment, and a green one took its place. Smiling, the man released the girl's hand and grabbed the large handle of the steel door and wrenched it open. With the door open, the barking reached their ears. After a few steps, the smell hit them as well. It was bad, but the girl knew that if that was what she had to put up with to have a doggy, she'd get used to it. After several more flights of stairs and a slight drop in temperature, they touched down onto smooth concrete. The barking was much louder now. The sounds of dozens of dogs, all varying sizes and volumes. The little girl was so excited she was shaking. She immediately made a beeline for the first cage she saw and asked, "Is that my doggy?" Pointing inside, the man laughed. No, I've got one picked out special just for you." He led her over to a section of the kennel towards the back. "Now, I just found this one, so he's a little scared," the man said. The girl read into the cage for a moment. After a time, her face warped with disappointment. "Why doesn't he look right?" she asked. "Well, I usually groom them right away, but you were so excited, I decided it could wait," the man explained. "Is he asleep?" she asked. "Probably. He's very tired. He had a long trip. Can we wake him up?" the girl asked in hushed tones. "Just for a few minutes, and then he needs to rest." "Okay." The little girl took a few steps forward and lightly rapped on the metal bars of the cage, the sound bouncing around under the high ceilings. Who's there, please? I just want to see my family." The little girl's nose wrinkled in disapproval. "Well, he doesn't sound like a doggy at all." The man's eyes remained warm as he pulled a small remote out of his pocket. "No, he doesn't. Whoever is there, I'll give you whatever you want." You want money? I don't have a lot. Boo." The voice was replaced by violent, tortured screams. The man's eyes never left the cage as he released the pressure of his thumb from the small remote. "What are doggies who don't sound like doggies?" "Sweetheart," the girl replied instantly. "Bad doggies. And we don't want bad doggies, do we? No, only good doggies, please. I'll do anything, just stall." The voice was cut off again, and a reprise of screams was heard. After a few seconds, the man released his thumb once more. Only heavy, pained breathing was heard from the cage. Suddenly, loud guttural barking was heard. The little girl clapped her hands as she jumped up and down. "Oh, thank you, Daddy. Thank you so much. I knew you'd get me a real doggy. I knew you would. You're very welcome, sweetheart. Now you go upstairs and pick out a leash. Just make sure it's a bright color so we can find him if he gets loose at night. Okay, okay. Happiness was radiating off the small girl like a space heater, and she made her way towards the stairs, past the cages of men in various states of starvation barking as loudly as they could, past the men painted black, yellow, or brown with fur painfully stitched to their skin, past the large tank of water, with the man in the orange wetsuit floating at the top, outfitted with makeshift scuba gear. As she put one foot on the stairs to start her ascent, she stopped. She turned around and placed a hand on the tank, watching the decaying body bob in the filthy water. "I'm sorry I forgot to feed you, Mr. Fish. I won't forget to feed my doggy." Then she turned around and dashed up the stairs. She couldn't wait to play with her new doggy story, too. Tantrum. Let me just make something clear. I never get to go out somewhere nice. Like ever, my best friend and I struggle just to pay our bills every month. So anything fancier than McDonald's is usually out of the question. We'll save up for months to go on one of our roommate dates. So it's a really special tray. I've never been to the Lotus Bloom before, but it's one of those overpriced pop-ups around the city that everyone has been raving about. We just barely got a reservation, and I was so excited to go, we basically had the menu memorized before we even arrived. But the second we were seated, I see this mother and her kid like 3 tables over. Honestly, it kind of shocked me given the price of the place, of course. I was mostly just worried about the child throwing a temper tantrum and ruining the atmosphere. I mean, look, I'm not a huge kid person, but I don't mind them when they're well behaved, or at least in places they belong. I'm not gonna give you the stink eye if your brat is screaming in the middle of Chuck E. Cheese, but this is a nice place with no kids menu and a $40 per plate minimum. Like, who in their right mind takes a little kid here? I tried not to look over, but Steph was obviously annoyed too. The girl looked about 6 or 7, so I thought maybe she was too old to throw a fit at a restaurant, but I didn't count on it. It was just a knee-jerk reaction, you know. I was on edge, anticipating having to deal with another parent who just didn't give a crap if their precious poopsie was bothering the other guests. At any rate, it was relatively quiet so far. We ordered our food, and after chatting for a while, I pretty much forgot all about the kid. Then the screaming began. There was no warm-up. It went from upscale ambience to a shrill, blood-curdling shriek. I would have thought the kid was being murdered, and I looked over reflexively. However, immediately after that ice pick to the skull, the kid was laughing at the top of her lungs as she ran back and forth down the aisle. The mother, for her part, didn't even seem to notice, totally detached, staring off into space. So we all have to deal with it while the mom just blocks it out. I looked around and saw that a few other people were just as annoyed. Though none were staring as blatantly as I was, I tried to catch the mother's eye, but she was a million miles away. I waited to see if the wait staff would do anything, but I figured they weren't allowed to intervene like that. I remember a news story years ago where parents were outraged by a restaurant putting up a sign asking parents to keep their kids behaved. I felt like getting up and yelling at the woman myself, but I didn't want to end up getting kicked out instead. Now, before you get all mad at me, I'm not hating on the kid herself, just on the fact that this wasn't really the place for her, and honestly, it isn't the kid so much as the people raising them. Can't fault the child. So I tried really hard to just ignore the laughter. Obvio. Honestly, it's better than screaming, loud and a bit annoying, but whatever. I didn't want to let it ruin my night. Steph had this super irritated look on her face, and I knew she was thinking the essay me thing, but neither of us said anything. Our food arrived a few minutes later, and it looked even better than the pictures on the site. How often does that happen? For a second, I was too focused on them. Why meal to stress over an unruly child? However, I barely had my fork in my hand when the little girl started shrieking again. I jerked my head over and saw the kid standing next to her table. He, staring right at her mother and screaming in rage. Again, the mother didn't respond, even when the little girl started knocking cups off the table. The tantrum escalated as the girl began pushing NG chairs over, but her mom just sat there like nothing was happening. I couldn't believe she was that passive about her kid's behavior, and I tried to catch her gaze so that she would can out. But that was when I noticed the mother's expression, like really noticed it. She wasn't just a little spaced out. It was like she couldn't hear the kid at all. In fact, her eyes were kind of glazed over, and for the first time I saw how pale and exhausted she looked. Maybe that's normal for a parent with a difficult child, but this just seemed different. The sound of shattering glass made me jump, and I realized the girl has managed to break a plate. That was when a server finally approached. Maybe the manager. Based on the attire, I was relieved and really hoped they just asked the woman to go. It was hard not to rubberneck, but I turned back to my plate. Maybe they'd leave without causing a scene. But when the girl screamed again, it was like a shockwave through the restaurant. My water rattled, and Steph and I looked at each other. I heard a strange sound, and when I looked over, I noticed the manager was partially hunched over. His hand was on his mouth, and his eyes were closed. As his legs started to buckle, I noticed blood trickling out of his ear. He collapsed, and I could clearly see blood pouring from his mouth and nose, too. Most of us stood up then. Some diners ran over to help, calling for someone to dial 911. I noticed people around me with their phones out before I could even reach for mine, but seconds later, the girl was screaming, she again, and all of the people who'd been trying to help the manager suddenly cried out in agony. Several of them fell over, and the ones who didn't were holding their heads. I noticed that they all had blood running from their ears, some of them their noses, even their eyes. I stumbled back and knocked over my chair. Steph was up now, too, and we inched away from the scene. The girl screamed again, and several of the patrons screamed with her as blood gushed from their mouths, eyes, and ears. The rest of them hit the ground then. Some of them had their eyes open and blinking dead-eye, like the mother. The little girl turned to face the rest of us, her face red with rage. I can't remember clearly what happened after that. I recall people screaming and hushing, rushing to the doors. Steph and I were just far enough back to avoid getting trampled as tables, chairs, and people alike were shoved out of the way. When the girl screamed again, all I could hear was ringing. I cringed and grabbed my ears. They were wet. For a moment, my vision swayed, and I thought I might pass out. Beside me, Steph had fallen to her knees. I gritted my teeth and grabbed her by the elbow, hurrying to the exits as fast as I could. But when I got there, I saw people freaking out, banging on the doors and windows, unable to open them. There were people at the emergency exit, people throwing chairs at the glass. The doors weren't budging. My ears throbbed, but my hearing was starting to come back now. I looked over and saw the little girl crawling up to the level where all of us were huddled. Tables and chairs began to topple out of her way without her even touching them. My adrenaline was too high to really process what I was seeing. I just knew we had to get out of there. There were no other options. So I grabbed Steph and made a run for the back. I figured there had to be an exit through the kitchen, though I feared it would be blocked too. It was better than just standing there either way. Once we reached the kitchen, however, I quickly realized I wasn't the only one with that idea. We met an aggressive crowd pushing through the small space in a frenzy. If we tried to push through, we'd probably be injured. When the girl screamed again, even from the other room, the pots on the stove exploded, covering people with boiling water. Some of the burners were still on, and fire burst through the air, spreading over the panicked patrons. I froze, watching people burn alive before me, until Steph G. grabbed my hand and pulled. Together, we ran down the back hall. It was a dead end, but for the bathrooms. The handicapped restroom was the only one that was single stall, the only room that locked. We ran inside and secured it, then put our legs up against the door from that position to make it harder to open. Of course, putting pressure on the door won't stop it from being ripped off its hinges, and I get the feeling that our efforts are pointless. I tried 911 several times, but all I heard was a sharp, static kind of sound. The screaming outside of the room was so loud I felt like it was cutting through me. It went on for a long, long time. Steph and I have been in here now for a good half hour. The screams have gradually died down. It's gotten pretty quiet. We talked about checking to see what was happening, but I don't think it's such a good idea, especially not when it's so silent after all that. Even if people had managed to escape, it wouldn't be this. Still, I can hear steps, though, echoing down the hallway. Someone is heading our way. Short, bouncy steps, skipping, maybe. Steph is reaching for my hand. I guess I'm D1 typing anyway. Story 3. Great whales. The man approached the bridge as he normally did, a crimson book tucked under his left arm, a dim lantern held in his right. His eyes alighted on the young woman, perched on the steel guard. A slight breeze rustled her dark hair. As the man stepped closer, his sawless clicking against the asphalt like a freshly shod horse, the woman froze. The light danced over her features, etched into a primal mask of embarrassment. The man didn't seem to take notice of the pained look. He simply cleared his throat and stared out over the edge of the bridge. When he finally spoke, it was with the voice of a patient librarian, the kind that doesn't need to help you with finding the right book, but went to get it for you anyway. This old mill bridge is haunted, you know. No one in town, old side or new, would say otherwise. Everyone knows someone whose soul has been taken by the myth of this place. Despite its multiple repairs, the ramshackle construction seems ancient within its landscape. These pillars that used to be support beams, carrying the weight of the original wooden covering, stand as charred reminders of the history of the bridge. Various names inscribed on these pillars memorialize the dozens of people who have lost their lives here. They're all carved in the same writing, the kind that requires a tremendous amount of effort to etch deliberately into the surface of the weathered oak, and a lot of emotional toil for the carver, haphazardly inscribing the name of a loved one whom they'd never see again. Emily Jones was one carver, a mother in her early 40s, whose son had been found in the brook below. The red Camaro had torn through the old oaken barrier of the bridge and had shattered below. Right down there, the bridge's side rails were rebuilt, this time with that cold steel you're gripping so tightly they used to be oak logs. The hole was there for a while, though it served as an example for others never to drink and drive, as the 3 boys who had been killed were coming from a party in Newtown. Their grandparents wouldn't have approved of their companionship, but that's at the back of most people's minds when they're invited to a high school party. When they had finished their night out, Alex Jones claimed with neither slurred speech nor unbalanced street that he was okay to drive. Nobody questioned him. He had then proceeded to shatter a bottle of red wine onto the white living room carpet, staining it with a deep crimson splotch, and even as he host poured salt over the rather minimalistic white carpet, trying desperately to exorcise the stain from the pattern of rivulets in the rug. The other 2 boys, George Reynolds and Michael Smith, got into the car with Alex anyways. He was the designated driver after all. Children who trudge through the creek for fun still find pieces of the red paint chips and glass from the car's frame around the banks of mud, scattered as they are like flecks of blood rising up from the dirty waters. Despite the time that's passed, the woman shifted slightly, not enough to move herself from the edge of the bridge, but enough to count it as a shift rather than a tremble. The fall will kill you, you know. If you're still wondering about that, the gurgling water showed up to the unlikely pair, piercing the silence that followed. Underneath the bridge are solid walls of rock, with mud banks that never quite touch near the edge of the creek, and, of course, the pillars of concrete and steel that support the old bridge. The bridge creates a cavern that children and spend hot summer days under, the kind of day when you so much as step outside and your clothes are already stuck to your body in slick sweat, and drinking a glass of ice water seems like a blessing from on high. They would play in the thick air that settled in that creek bed, even though parents would warn them of it when it seemed like rain. The waters rise quickly underneath the bridge and you might be carried off like Evelyn Rose, they'd say, but children don't. Listen. When Newtown was first coming into its own right as part of Old Town, there was a rigidness when the children played. The children knew they looked different from one another, and while Old Town parents whispered fiercely to their children when they came home about the troublemakers across the creek, it didn't stop them from returning. The bridge wasn't there yet, just the 2 banks of stone that created a miniature canyon to be explored. Those early explorers didn't mind who was what color, as long as everyone followed the rules. But when they grew into adults, as the bridge was finally being constructed, they learned the hatred from their parents. Perhaps it was one of them who carved Genesis 1:21 underneath the bridge into that stone, but there's no clear way of knowing, covered in moss and skittering creatures that were slimy to the touch. The inscription seems ancient at this point, as if it were a secret from the gods of old, which had lost all real meaning. She connected to the reality of the bridge. It's just a part of the legend now. It's surprising that such an ill-omened structure exists here at all. Over there's the old Presbyterian church with that enormous steel cross right at the side of the road as a sort of lighthouse for those needing aid, and on the other side of the street, St. Francis Catholic Church, whose name owl eyes has to be capitalized, but whose parking lot is much smaller than their neighbors across the creek. On the Newtown side is the Black Baptist Church, and you'd almost miss that it was a church if you didn't see the single wooden cross that stands and ornamented along the driveway. We're right between three churches. Don't let them scare you, though. You won't be sitting on hallowed ground here. The churches being spoken about had no lights on in their windows. The buildings were dark, shadowy structures looming in the distance, the only light being a single spotlight aimed at a large St. Heel cross. Moments passed filled with only the slight gurgle of flowing water. When the original concrete foundations had been poured, a series of young women in the community had gone missing. No ransom notes were ever posted that the bodies of the women had ended up in the concrete foundations. These rumors reached the police, and the foundations were ripped up, but no bodies were found. It caused the original construction of the covered bridge to be delayed, but sure enough, the moment the new concrete foundations were in place, the rumors flew wildly again. Hushed muttering in town hall meetings were as violent as the waters below the bridge during the flooding season. As people called for another search of the foundations, the rumors poured forth, uncensored and violent. The construction company wouldn't let them do it again. The new bridge had to be built to connect the new half of the town. It was a matter of infrastructure. It needed to happen. There was almost an eighth girl who went missing way back in 1923. What the soul of the bridge claimed her as part of its own, nice and clear. When the bridge was finally finished, here was an opening ceremony, and the mayor was the first person to drive over the bridge, unifying Old Town and New Town. His daughter, Catherine Moore, was waving from the back seat. She went to the Wattower High School in Old Town, and this would be the only time she ever visited New Town. She wasn't one of the children who played in the creek. She was the mayor's daughter after all. She wore a beautiful dress with sunflowers on it, and a wide-brimmed hat that made her look like one of those movie stars, Edna Purviance or Jane Winton. They found her body hanging from the bridge's overhead rafter, as with a coarse rope around her neck, still wearing the same dress with sunflowers on it. They seemed to move as real sunflowers should move when they found her, swaying in the wind, dancing toward the beams of the flashlights. There wasn't any sign of a struggle, but people couldn't imagine it as a suicide. Not her. Her name was the first name scratched onto the bridge. Apparently it was to blame someone, anyone, for the missing girls. The police arrested Jordan Brown for it. He was given the death penalty for it. The police had to catch a criminal somehow. It needed to happen. It was a matter of infrastructure. His name was put on the bridge out of spite by someone almost 13 years later, right above Catherine Moore's. It needed to happen. The woman opened a mouth. The man paused. She closed her mouth. He checked his watch. Moments passed, filled with only a slight gurgle of flowing water and an indistinct ticking. The original covering of the bridge made it seem like the maw of some great monster, its mouth open wide to swallow the next poor soul. The empty darkness that lingered in that space of the road always felt colder, and one could imagine, as they lingered in that space, that they stood breathless at the bottom of the ocean. It always felt like there needed to be an extra gasp for air when one emerged from the bridge in the darkness. The dead air didn't sit right in the lungs. When the covered bridge caught fire in 1988, people originally thought that was going to be the end of it. They thought maybe the fire would clear up all the spirits resting in those timbers as if they were simply bats hanging from the roof. The bridge didn't need to be covered in the first place anyway. Most people claimed, knowing that they would miss the archaic symbol of the town. The hopes that maybe the bridge wasn't still haunted went away. Unofficial reports came out about the arson. A young man, high on some kind of hallucinogenic, seeing demons only he could see, but everyone knew lurked under the roof, set the roof ablaze with a makeshift torch. Matthew Halter had imagined himself as some sort of saint exorcising the spirits trapped there. You should have seen him that night, eyes wild and fierce, a man on a mission. When he lit the structure, he hadn't expected the rage of the inferno that consumed the bridge. One might have seen it as the gates of hell opening to swallow this courageous fool who had believed he could alter the devil's structures himself, the way the fire licked the supports, crackled through the ancient timbers, and devoured the dry wood, brought down the roof far sooner than Halter had anticipated. There wasn't much left to identify his body of. Ram, how the fire ate away at his form, but there was enough to be able to write his name on one of the remaining pillars. People considered not writing his name on the pillars, since he had tried so hard to cleanse the bridge, but his name had to be written all the same. It needed to happen. The woman's arms were trembling slightly. Her gaze didn't leave the darkened riverbed. The man traced the charred edges of the beam with his finger. The lantern's candle had run low, but was still burning merrily. He opened his crimson book and began leafing through the pages. They're thinking of rebuilding the bridge, just starting over. It won't happen, of course, because it's the only real connection between the two parts of town for a ways. It's hard to create a detour that takes you 10 minutes in another direction, but the idea is there. It feels colder now, don't you think? If they replace the bridge, who knows what'll happen to lines, those names they might get put onto the new bridge. But that doesn't seem right, does it, for all those names to be lost like that? So back up a bit, won't you? I don't know what might happen to your name. Moments passed. The river gurgled below. In the distance, far from the bridge, a light shone up onto a steel cross, casting its shadow into the sky. There was an indistinct ticking and the sputtering of a candle, and majestically, like some great whale breaching the surface of the waves, the woman clambered over the rail in one slow motion, and a crimson book snapped shut. Story 4. Fluffy. The drifter had been walking all day, and he was on the lookout for a place to bed down for the night. That is easier said than done due to the fact that he likes to travel strictly by the back roads for reasons only he really knows. He was tall, with black hair, tan, dark leather-like skin. He certainly looked the part of someone who spends most of his life exposed to the elements. Everything he owns is in a ratty old backpack that he has had for years, but he is happy. He answers to no one, and after a couple of years of walking the back country, he has seen some incredible scenery and met some very interesting people. He isn't sure how far he has walked today, but he is feeling like he is very close to the Louisiana state line. He is excited about that, because Louisiana is one state he's never been to before. Sometime tomorrow, he won't be able to say that anymore. Right now, however, as night time approaches, he needs to find a place to rest for a while. He likes to be off the road by dark. He has had some close calls with drivers not seeing him, even on these back roads and the tracks. He doubts very much he will have a roof over his head tonight. He is too far out in the backwoods for that to happen. Best he can hope for is an old barn or something that he can hotel in for the night. It is almost full-on dark now, and a good place to sack down has not presented itself as of yet. This could end up being one of those nights where he ends up sleeping with his back to a tree. Oh well, it could be worse. Suddenly, as he walked along the side of the road, he stepped in something wet, squishy, and gross. It was just dark enough that he didn't see it coming. Whatever it was, he stepped square in the middle of it, and almost fell as his foot went skidding to the side. "What the hell is that?" he muttered to himself as he moved to get out of the middle of the disgusting pile. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was an animal of some sort. It was fairly large in size, like a deer or a large dog. He couldn't really tell because not all the pieces were there. This was not a case of an animal getting run over. This was a case of an animal getting torn apart. It was horrible, and, to make matters worse, it had not happened all that long ago. The blood was still wet, and it hadn't started to stink yet. This was a fresh kill. The drifter began to wonder what kind of animal might live in this part of the country that was big enough to do that kind of damage to another fairly large animal. Were there bear around here? Wolves, mountain lions? He finally decided that it really didn't make much difference what it was. He just didn't want to meet up with it out here in the middle of nowhere. Time to keep moving and put some distance between himself and whatever might still be in the area. He walked for several minutes, nervously looking in, listening for anything out of the ordinary. He never really noticed anything, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched and followed. He stopped suddenly a couple of times and stood stone still, trying to catch a stray sound or movement from anything that might be out there in the woods just a few yards from the road. He thought he heard something moving through the trees, but it sure was scaring the hell out of him, though he thought of running, but he knew that if he did, that would just encourage whatever it was to start chasing him. He just kept a steady pace, becoming a little more hopeful with every step. Being so focused on getting out of there, the drifter didn't notice the headlights of the vehicle coming up behind him until it was just a short distance away. Finally, he realized that he wasn't alone out here, and he began feeling better about his situation. Normally the drifter didn't hitchhike, but this night he was shaken enough that flagging this vehicle down felt like the right thing to do. It turned out to be an old pickup truck, and it was driving very slowly down the middle of the road, and he could hear someone yelling something. A bit of his shakiness began to return. When the truck was almost upon him, he started waving his arms in an effort to get the truck to stop. The driver was so intent on yailing out the window he almost didn't see the drifter until it was too late. The truck came to a stop, and the passenger side window began a slow descent to allow the driver to talk to him. He was a grizzled old man in filthy coveralls and a t-shirt. He had an unkempt beard that was stained yellow from years of tobacco use. He wore a baseball cap so old that the emblem on the front was no L longer legible. He certainly looked the part of someone who lived in the backwoods of Louisiana. "What in the devil are you doing walking out here in the middle of the night?" he asked. "I could just as easy run you right over." Boy, the drifter leaned against the passenger door and spoke through the window. "I am just trying to find a good place to bed down for the night, but I got a little spooked by some noises a ways back." "What kind of noises?" "I've been out here for hours trying to find Fluffy, and he is nowhere to be found. He's my pet, and I'm real worried about him. Maybe it was him you heard." "Could be," the drifter said. "It sounded like something walking through the woods just off the road." "Do you think it could have been Fluffy?" "Don't hardly know. He likes people well enough. He might have been following you. I love that animal, but he can be moody and downright cranky. That's why I'm out here. I spent a lot of time making Fluffy his fave, a right supper, and for some reason he got all uppity and wouldn't finish it. Nothing pisses me off more than that. He's real finicky about what he eats, and it takes dang near all day to get it ready for him. I am not about to let him get away with not eating it." I got so frustrated that I gave him a good whack with my walking stick. He yelped like a sick puppy and took off through the screen door. They've been yailing looking for him ever since. Damn stubborn animal, the drifter thought for a moment. He remembered the dead carcass that he had stepped in. He wondered if he should even tell the old man about it. Maybe that pile of blood and guts had been Fluffy. Not the kind of news you want to share with a honked-off old stranger on a back road in the middle of the night. And Allie decided to tell the old man. If that was Fluffy, he needed to know. "You know," he began, "I ran across a carcass alongside the road about a mile back or so. Looked like a fresh kill. I hope that wasn't Fluffy." "Well, I kind of doubt it," said the old man. "But what did it look like?" "It was a pretty good size. Maybe like a German shepherd or something like that. No, that wouldn't be Fluffy. He is nowhere near that size. He's much bigger." Something plowed into the drifter's side with the force of a freight train. His breath left him with a whoosh, and he found himself propelled head over heels into the road in front of the pickup. He landed on his back, and he lay there trying to catch his breath. But there was no time. Something huge pounced upon his chest. N.D. began raking at his body with powerful slashes. The drifter's clothing offered little resistance to the razor-sharp claws. He could feel something panting in his face. Its breath was hot, and it was dripping with some rancid drool that fell all over the drifter's head and neck. For just a brief moment he entertained thoughts of being able to escape, but the weight of the beast, as well as the ferocity of its attack, was too much. The last thought to pass through his mind was the horrible realization that he was being eaten alive. The old man slowly stepped out of the pickup and walked toward the beast in front of the truck. The lights on the truck illuminated the bloodbath that was occurring in the road. The beast was huge. It stood 5 feet tall at the shoulders, and D was covered in matted black and gray fur. Its face was almost reptilian in nature, with a long snout, and it was covered in scales. 2 large fangs protruded from the sides of its jaws, which the beast was furiously using to rip chunks from. The drifter's body. The old man watched for a few more moments, then slowly approached the beast. "Fluffy, there you are. I've been looking all over for you." The monster slowly raised its head, dripping with blood and gore, and warily eyed the old man. A low growl rumbled from deep inside its throat. It seemed to recognize the old man, and the growling ceased. The old man stood and watched his pet continue to rip the drifter apart. After a few moments, Fluffy stopped, and as if it had done this many times before, it started to make its way towards the back of the pickup. The old man stepped in front of it and raised his walking stick. "Oh, no, Fluffy. You get back there and eat. You know how upset I get when you don't finish your food." Story 5. The Hiker's Lapse. Maintaining a steady pace, placing one foot in front of the other, trudging along as he'd done for the past 4 months, Sam felt the distance growing between himself and the creek. A crisp breeze came down from the mountain, and Sam took in a slow breath, smiling at the scents of earth and pine. Minor hunger pangs frayed the edges of the meditative vacuum in his mind, but he chose to ignore them. Almost all hikers traversing southern Washington on the Pacific Coast Trail stop for the night at the campground at Panther Creek. They would casually unload their gear, set up camp for the night, and sit around a nice fire. Perhaps they would invite some neighboring campers to join them, campers who would not hesitate to accept. There is something about being in nature, and especially the remote outdoors, that serves to quickly dissolve the strangeness between strangers. That same ethereal something inspires the unspoken code of the hiker. We are in this together. We look out for each other, and though we may never see one another again, we are nevertheless a kind of family. Sam gently urged his thoughts away from the campground and its temporary denizens, reorienting his focus on the climb before him. It's not that he was immune to the kinship felt between hikers. In fact, he'd very much enjoy countless communal campfires himself, since he'd set out from Mexico in April. However, Sam had woken up early on this particular morning, feeling especially rested and alert, and hurrying his pace throughout the day, found that he was easily the first to arrive at Panther Creek by mid-afternoon. Standing alone at the bridge that crossed the creek, a kind of restlessness had nagged at him, feeling uncharacteristically agitated, maybe even a little manic. Sam had decided to press on and hike late into the evening. Looking up at a uniform gray sky, he dropped his trekking poles and unbuckled the chest strap of his harness, setting his pack in the middle of the worn trail. He took off his boots, pulled on his thermal pants and an extra pair of socks, and stuffed his jacket into the top of his pack for easy access. The rain might come soon, but he intended to stay cool as long as possible as he ascended the steep, zigzagging trail ahead. The second he heard or felt the first drops, he would just quickly grab his jacket and maybe look for a serviceable place to tent up. The ascent was harder on him than he anticipated. 4 months of hiking had left Sam lean, his calves plump and solid like softballs, and his lungs operated at peak efficiency. But the air thinned as every step took him higher, and he had already set a furious pace throughout the day. Also, Sam remembered that he had foolishly neglected to eat dinner. He took a candy bar from his pocket and unwrapped it. Taking a small bite, he was almost to the next switchback when he was startled by a cracking sound somewhere above him. A tree broke free of its base and toppled through the branches of the adjacent pines. He stood frozen for a moment, empty, his jaw slack as he listened to the absolute silence that followed. His trance was broken when a stream of drool, mingled with chocolate and caramel and bits of peanut, trickled from the corner of his mouth. He chuckled at himself and wiped his chin, stepping forward once more. Soon he was at the point of the switchback, and Sam felt a wave of elation to see that this switchback sported an apron, a small patch of level ground that he could use as an impromptu rest area. He grunted a sigh of relief as he shoved the empty wrapper into his pocket and stepped off the trail, panting. Gee. Sam pressed his thumb and forefinger into the quick-release buckle at his sternum, releasing the chest strap. That's when he heard it, the crackle of thunder. But no, this was close T. His was near him, and the sound was growing. He turned to the slope above him and saw it too late, the tree falling into him. He tried to fall backward, twisting away, and managed to take his head out of the trunk's path, but it slammed down onto his right shoulder. Instead, then he was falling and rolling down the mountain. He flew into the air, flipping madly, and when he landed, his left heel dug into the dirt and his face slammed next to it, breaking his nose. He rolled and flew again, inverted and facing the hill, but his right arm slammed into a tree trunk, spinning him like a 2T in the air. The world spun madly for Sam, and he managed a single thought, "I'm dead," before the snapping of branches ushered him into darkness. Pain, and cold. Sam awoke and immediately regretted it. He couldn't even tell what hurt at first. In his foggy-headed delirium, in those first waking moments, Sam knew only that everything hurt and that he was freezing, tired, and confused. There was a rushing sound and a copper smell, and what little he could see in the darkness blurred, and pinpoints of light danced over everything. Everything around him was soaked, so it must have. He rained at some point, but the clouds had thinned somewhat as he slept. The damp that he could see sparkled in what little moonlight filtered through the branches above. He tried to take a breath and a sharp pain in his chest made him cough, bringing him a new understanding of misery. The world spun as he struggled to breathe, struggled to keep from coughing. His ribs were broken, his lung was punctured, his breathing shallow and quick. He decided to take stock. He tried to lift his left leg, but pain sliced across the back of it, just under his buttock. Something was torn. A wave of nausea hit him, and he tried to cover his mouth, but the contents of his arm slapped against his side. His right shoulder hurt where the tree had struck him. His right arm was shattered, though a numbness saved him from whatever agony might come later. He focused on controlling his breathing, and after several minutes the nausea passed. Even lying still, he couldn't seem to get enough breath. His back ached along its entire length, but miraculously, his left arm and right leg were relatively functional. Aside from a few minor scratches, his head throbbed through it all, and he was so incredibly cold. His mind eventually cleared, though the headache remained, and he found he was able to turn his head slightly from side to side. Despite a tightness in his neck, he took in his surroundings. His phone was gone. His backpack was gone. It had flown from him during his tumble and was probably halfway up to the apron. However far that was, he had no idea. His emergency satellite GPS messenger was clipped to the side of the pack, where it could do him no good. The candy bar wrapper was still in his left pocket, but he had missed his chance to catch rainwater with it. He thought of the 3-liter water bladder in his pack and imagined sucking on the nozzle. Imagined the relief that even the slightly rubbery-tasting water would provide. Sam imagined how he could be found if he was still alive by morning. Some ambitious early bird might make it to the apron, might take a break there, and maybe might look over the edge. If his pack hadn't fallen too far, this hypothetical savior might spot the pack and realize what had happened, and they could possibly get help down to him in time to save his life. Maybe, might, possibly, not likely. Sam realized he would probably die here amidst the pines. He wouldn't last long enough to starve to death, that was certain, but the cold would surely get him before the dehydration. His jacket was still in his pack, so that was it. He would die of exposure, right here, alone. The damp diffused the smells of the area, the same scents he'd so relished throughout High's track had lost their charm and inspired no comfort. Beyond the smells of his own blood and body odor, he was awash in the bouquet of the coniferous rainforest, earth and pine, of course, and a slight tinge of rotting undergrowth. The wind continued to hiss through the crowns and branches of the trees, but there was a new sound under the rest. A slow, pulsating hiss came from somewhere off to his left. Anxiety crept into his chest, and his heart began to pound. Sam continued to listen, trying to hold himself still, his joints stiff and his muscles cramping, but he couldn't. He stopped the trembling. He realized the sound was getting closer, but he couldn't spot the source. Something low to the ground and moving steadily toward him. It kept getting louder. Then the rhythm. Icy rustle quickened. Shh. And then there it was. From a distance, the creature looked like a long black sleeping bag. It was moving straight for Sam, and though 10 feet of it had come into view, it had not yet revealed its entire length. A 2-foot width splayed out to a bulbous 4 or 5 feet toward the rear. It was black as ink, glistening, mottled brown along its back. Leech, a giant goddamn leech. Hey, he cried out. Hey, get away. Gee, go away. But his voice was weak, hoarse, and it lacked conviction. The creature took no notice. Anyway, it continued to approach, undulating toward him. Sam tried to sit up, but immediately fell back, overwhelmed by pain and exhaustion. He slapped at the thing's head, but it rose up out of half-reach, wavering drunkenly, its mouth open, revealing concentric rings of sharp teeth and multiple sets of thick fangs in the center, more akin to the mouth of a lamprey eel. Sam sobbed and tried desperately to push at the body, but his efforts were futile. No, sobbed Sam, and the creature fell upon his face. A powerful suction pulled the entirety of his head into the gaping maw. His jaw and neck exploded with sharp agony as dozens of dagger-like teeth embraced him in a powerful grip. The inner fangs seized him by the skull as the teeth released, extended, and reattached farther down, around his shoulders and clavicles. Sam was suffocating as the fangs released and his head was pulled still deeper in. His face was suddenly awash with a powerful bile burn in his scalp, his face, his eyes. He vomited, his sick bursting from his mouth and nose, dripping from the perforations in the mess of his neck, mingling with the creature's digestive juic, as his melted scalp and eyelids, as well as the tip of his nose, sloughed away from his head as he was eaten alive, his whole body clenched in pain and fear. Sam's mind gradually dimmed to that primal simplicity reserved for a prey animal in its final moments. The dim light of his consciousness vaguely begged for the end to hasten, and a moment later, Sam was gone. Story 6, Officer Down, recording begins. The date is November 1st, 2018. This is Detective Ray Sherman. Excuse me. Badge number 13,557 of the Internal Affairs Investigation Unit, new. Number 334. We are investigating the night of October 31st, 2018, case AF 6H765, where Officer Pete Mendoza was found alone with 5 surrounding officers dead in an apartment following a routine domestic disturbance investigation. The only remaining body cam is that of Officer Mendoza, which turned off as things escalated at the house. Officer Mendoza was found unarmed and stripped of his clothing, while the officers found dead showed signs of cannibalism, including scratch and bite marks. In one instance, as pointed out by one of the coroners, there were signs of possible rape. The 5 officers in question were Aaron Brown, 31, decapitation; Neville Larson, 42, decapitation; Linda Miles, 27, stabbed with signs of cannibalism; Michael Mickey Moroney, 60, self-inflicted gun, shot; and finally Mary Lynn's, 24, in Mary's unusual case. Her intestines were pulled out through her mouth, and she was stabbed through the clavicle and held in place, pinned to a door. No signs of jaw dislocation or anything that would indicate human foul play. Officer Mendoza is suffering from PTSD and anxiety and will be transported to the nearest psychiatric ward unit at Our Lady Memorial Hospital. After we interview him, Report 1. Sergeant Harold Dixon. First report, 7:03 p.m., Officer Ray Sherman. Badge number 13,557. State your name, he says to the other pair. Son in the room, I am Sergeant Harold Dixon. Badge number 7088. Sergeant Dixon, please run me through a timeline of events from when you first saw Officer Mendoza to when he was dispatched to investigate the domestic disturbance. Of course, it was just another day. I had my coffee, said my usual hellos to everybody, and got bitched at by my superiors upstate. As always, I saw Officer Mendoza that day, and nothing seemed off. He seemed completely normal, and was actually telling me about how excited he was because his little girl was starting softball after his shift. Did Officer Mendoza do anything out of the ordinary? Not to my knowledge, but his partner Dory might know more of that. All I did was say my usual hello to Pete and did my other work, and that was all I saw of him until they found him later. What about the other officers murdered? Anything unusual from any of them? Come to think of it, Mary, she was always very superstitious, and always told us when she was a girl that she'd had her palm read and the fortune teller told her she was gonna die on Halloween. She must have believed it, because she always requested off that day each year, but we needed her to work this time as we were short-handed, poor girl. She came in this world screaming and probably left the same way. Report to Officer Dory Veg. Hey, please state your name and role. Dory Vega, partner of Pete Mendoza. Was anything unusual to you about Pete that day? Nothing. Really, I usually go with him in every call, but I had a lot of paperwork to do, and he told me to stay behind, as Halloween is usually a bunch of empty reports and kids prank calling. What kind of paperwork? Usually arrests and forms we required to do. Has Pete said anything? He has yet to. Since they found him 15 hours ago, he has yet to say a word. Has anyone told his family? Yes, his wife and dog, Aether, have been informed of the situation. Why do you ask? I worried about Pete. Sometimes, on extremely rough days, he always had a Bible and rosary beads, and would mumble any prayers or verses that would come to him. He always said, the devil is testing me today, Dory, but I'm gonna win. Do you know if Officer Mendoza had any vices? Only drinking, but he overcame it. Hence the Bible, he always had it on him, said if he went to hell, at least there'd be reading material. Report 3. Dispatch Officer Cedric Hansen. Please state your name and role. Cedric Hansen, Dispatch Officer. Thank you. Anything unusual ever stick out about Pete? I've known Pete since college, and he was always a party animal, but settled down when he got a DUI, went to AA, and met his wife. From there till now, nothing. He was just very religious when he came back sober. Now, the night you got the call, was there anything unusual on the other end? Not really. It was from a neighbor who called in and said she heard screaming next door. It didn't help that we always get phone calls about that address. But again, with Halloween in full swing, everyone was on edge. We get tons of prank calls on that day. Every year, it never fails. We tried calling the house, as we know them quite well, and got no answer. Just an irritating tone, like the old dial-up internet modems. As someone who's worked and known Pete the longest, do you believe he would ever harm a colleague? Never. Pete's a great guy. He never touched a gun until he got to the fork. I know you have all your paperwork, evidence, and interviews that make it seem like Pete must have killed his fellow officers, since he was the only survivor. But I tell you this, Pete Mendoza is innocent. Whatever happened last night and that house makes me think that this is bigger than anything you could grasp. Why do you say that? Pete texted me before I came into this role. Impossible. He hasn't had access to a phone since he was found. Exactly. And you know what he texted me? Help, can't, scream, run. Report 4. Detective Ray Sherman. Detective Ray Sherman here. Reviewing all of the body cam footage we have, only Officer Mendoza's content was recovered. From what I can see, there was nothing unusual on the drive over. Officer Mendoza is pulling up to the address where the domestic disturbance was reported. As he pulls up, the other officers are already on location. Officer Mendoza is getting out of the car and walking into the house. As he walks up the driveway, there is screaming and loud heavy metal music audible. We see Halloween party decorations all over the front yard. The door is left open. and Officer Mendoza walks in and sees 4 officers kneeling in an X formation over what appears to be a pentagram. In the middle of this is a suspect in a red robe. He appears to be around 6 feet tall and is wearing some sort of horns, posy, lyre rams. At this point, the audio goes erratic and begins resembling Morse code, followed by screaming and then silence. Officer Mendoza appears to tell the suspect to drop any weapon. E as in to G. Head on the ground, the man looks at him with a smile, and Officer Mendoza appears to tell the other officers to stand up. None of them are listening, and the door shuts behind him as he turns around. Officer Mary Lynn's is pinned to the wall by hooks inserted near her clavicle. Officer Mendoza proceeds to point his gun at the suspect, and the suspect raises his right hand with his left one plow CD on one of the officer's shoulders. He begins to raise it, and the officer's head proceeds to roll off his shoulders. The lights flicker, and the man in the robe seems to vanish. From here the body cam video goes dark, and the audio continues for another 30 seconds with nothing but static noise and the sound of both men and women screaming nonstop. Report 5. Offie, Sir Pete Mendoza. Officer Mendoza, we're going to ask you a few questions now. Please answer them as best as you can. I can see your hand shaking. Would you like a smoke? No answer. Okay, then. Now, please just walk us back to the moment you walked into the house. Do you hear the screaming? I'm sorry. Do you hear the screaming? It started out as laughter, and now it's like somebody getting their soul tortured. Do you hear the screaming? Officer Mendoza, this is no time for games. You have serious crimes against you, and they're all screaming. They're dying. They're all dying. Please, turn it off. Please, please, turn it off. 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 Mendoza, there is no screaming. It's all in your head. It's all in your head, Mendoza. My head, it's all in my head. 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 All. A mushy, cracked skull sound is heard. What the fuck is? The audio abruptly cuts out. Report 6. Officer Kate Peets. This is Officer Kate Peets reporting. Badge number 36,369. Commenting on the night of November 1st. On which foot? Age shows Detective Sherman interviewing Officer Pete Mendoza. As they sit down, Officer Mendoza is shaking and clearly unstable for questioning. But here's where the whole story gets odd. After Detective Sherman tells Officer Mendoza that everything is in his head, a sharp spike of some sort erupts from Officer Mendoza's head, like someone cutting from the inside out, and punctures his skull. It unfurls into what I can only describe as a spider's legs and cracks Officer Mendoza's head in half vertically. Detective Sherman is sitting across from me, and we are trying to piece together all the events, but he has yet to say anything. Both of his hands are shaking, and his pupils are dilated. Detective Sherman has requested a pocket Bible, which has been provided. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Now, please recount to us, as best as you can, what happened after Officer Mendoza's head opened up. The footage just goes black. Do you hear the voices? Do you hear the screaming? Do you hear the voices? What voice, Detective Sherman? turn them off, 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 turn them off. What voices? Detective Sherman, it's too late. The audio goes static and then cuts out. Recording ends. Story 7. I grew up. My father died from pulmonary hypertension when I was only 4 years old. I still remember the night he had the heart attack, watching from the third-floor window of my great-grandmother's bedroom as he was wheeled on a stretcher across the driveway. Hell, I still remember the bare and twisted trees in the front yard, their shadows creeping like eerie tendrils across the lawn. This has little to do with the story I am about to tell, but it illustrates a point to all those who have questioned my validity in the past. My memories of early childhood have always been very clear, especially during that time of loss in my life. This is not something I imagine. This is not a memory that is vague to me. If I can remember that fateful night, I am sure that I am remembering this perfectly. The real story started in the middle of October, not long before I lost my father. Halloween was my favorite day of the year, and the entire month leading up to it was always a time of excitement. There would be nights where I would lay awake in bed, thrilled by the thought of dressing up as a cat for the 3rd year in a row, and what have you. One night in particular, after my mom stuck her head in our room and scolded me for still being up, I forced myself to close my eyes and attempted to drift off. I was almost there, just on the edge of sleep, when I heard the door slowly creak ajar. Being a clever kid, I thought it was my mom and kept my eyes closed while feigning cartoon snores that, in reality, she totally would not buy. It was my assumption that my mom would eventually Eve, satisfied that I had finally nodded off, but instead the door creaked even wider, and heavy footfalls began to trot into the bedroom. Eventually, I dared to peek with one eye open to see what was going on. What I saw was not my mom at all, but a monster. He was by no means scary. In fact, he was kind of cute, covered entirely in thick orange fur. He towered over my bed, with a wide grin of pointed teeth. 2 gnarled ram horns sat on either side of his head, and due to his size, they almost scraped against the ceiling. The monster did not acknowledge my sleeping little broth and the bed across the room. Instead, he held a clawed hand out for me to take. I'm not sure why I thought it was okay, but I accepted his gesture and placed my tiny palm within his and held it tightly. Slowly, he led me across the room and towards a blank space of wall where my mother had been intending to put some sort of wicker furniture. I watched in curiosity as the orange monster gently scraped a wide door shape against the wallpaper with his claw, and in an instant a gateway had appeared. Still leading me with the utmost care, he stepped through, and we were engulfed in a bright flash of light that forced me to squint. As it faded and my eyes adjusted, I found that we were no longer in my bedroom. We were in what I can only assume to be his world, and it was a world that I marveled at. A cobblestone marketplace stretched on before us, filled with stands and carts manned by every kind of monster you could picture. Witches cackled from a booth full of frothing, cheap potions, and they gave me candy corn as we passed them by. Vampires chilled beneath the shade of an awning, selling decorative vials of blood that glowed like obscene stained glass. There were werewolves, skeletons, mummies, and so much more, all of them busy preparing for Halloween, and all of them very friendly. Making our way through the market seemed to take hours, but it eventually led out into a wide park filled with trees and another glimmering gateway at its entrance. My monster guided me there, and after exchanging a warm embrace, he ushered me through the gates and gave he a cheerful wave goodbye, and then I woke up in my bed. My brother was still sleeping soundly across the room, and the blank wall was back to being blank. During breakfast, I told my family the wild tale. My mom reacted the way you'd expect the mother of a 4-year-old to react to some made-up story. My dad just smiled weakly. It was a dream, and I figured that was the end of it. But it had been such an exciting one. I wished I could have had it all over again. 1 year later, my wish came true. It was the middle of October again, and though it was still an exciting time, I no longer had trouble sleeping. But once again, one night I awoke to the creak of my bedroom door, and I opened my eyes to see my orange monster shuffling into the bedroom with a sheepish smile. I sprang out of bed to meet him, and yet again he drew the doorway on the wall with his claw and took me to his world. Everyone was excited to see me, and all of them remembered my name. The witches gave me candy again, and the vampires hissed hellos. It went the same way as the last dream, winding through the busy marketplace until we reached the gates at the park and bid each other farewell. The next year I had the dream again, and the year after that again. It had started to become my yearly Halloween tradition that only I knew about. It wasn't until I was 11 that the dreams began to change. That year, none of the monsters in the marketplace seemed happy to see me. They gave me and my orange monster stern looks as we passed, whispering in hushed voices that I could not understand. There was no candy for me, no greetings or smiles. It was an unnerving trip, and I think that my monster knew this, for he began to pick up his pace and was quick to lead me to the park. When I was 13, the marketplace became a hostile environment. All the kind creatures I had come to know for almost a decade shouted in harsh voices. They pointed with bony fingers, spitting angrily and ordering us to leave. For the first time, my monster actually picked me up and carried me through, not stopping until I was safely at the gateway. I was 16 Wattower, and the dreams finally became nightmares. My monster had come for me, like he always did each year, but something about him was different. His plush orange fur had grown thin and wispy, and his ram horns had various chips and cracks in them. He still held out his hand and took me through that doorway, but that was a grave mistake. We were chased through the market, bitten and clawed and slashed at. My ears were filled with whispers loud enough to drown in. But nobody's mouths were moving, and it almost seemed like they were being spoken in tongues. I was too big for my monster to carry, but I let him pull me along to the park. The other creatures followed us all the way to the gateway, not leaving any time for goodbyes. I was shoved through and woke up drenched in sweat in my bedroom, 17. My monster was a shadow of what he once was when he came to collect me. There was no chasing in this dream, no sense of imminent danger. There was, however, a massive dread that hung over us as we ambled through the cobblestone marketplace. The creatures stopped still at their booths, black holes in place of their eyes and mouths. They turned and stared as we passed. Though they were otherwise motionless, my monster had to stop often to catch his breath before we made it to the park. Before I entered the gates, I enveloped him in my arms and squeezed him tight like I had done as a child. He looked at me with saddened eyes, but grinned with those big teeth and ushered me forward like he always did. When I woke up, I found my yes were wet with tears. The next year I wondered if perhaps I would have the dream again. It was very late into October, much later than usual, and I had yet to dream my dream. On Halloween night, after late night parting with friends, I dreamed in a daze that someone was clawing at my walls. I got out of bed and moved cautiously across the floor to see that the light filled doorway to my monster's world was wide open. My bedroom door, on the other hand, was shut and I was completely alone. I went through the gateway by myself, wondering if perhaps he was waiting on the other side. Again, I was met with change when I found the long cobblestone street was empty, void of all structures and life. The only thing that accompanied me were the long smears of brown blood and the scatterings of what I could only assume to be flesh. There was a horrible rotting smell that made me cover my nose with the collar of my pajamas and forced me to make the familiar walk with trembling legs. For hours I walked, my bare feet slipping in blood and gore, staining my toes and making me shudder. I called out, but was only met with the sounds of the wind whispering through the streets. As the marketplace ended and gave birth to the park, I came to a halt and my stomach churned violently. There were corpses in my path now of the witches, the vampires, the werewolves, and monsters. They were mangled, horribly disfigured, and discarded in piles carelessly. No longer were they eyeless or cruel-looking, but the friendly creatures I'd imagined when I was very young. I was slipping through more blood, more flesh, and was now dodging bodies and bloody bits of candy underfoot. Straight ahead was the gates of the park, and standing before them was a familiar sight. The recognizable shape of my monster was waiting for me, but his back was turned. His fur was also very patchy, I noticed, revealing a muscular gray body that bulged and twitched with veins. The closer I drew, the better I could hear his deep rasping breaths. He did not turn to face me, but instead seemed hunched over something. My foot connected with a limb, and I tripped, yelping in surprise. The voice that came from my mouth was higher, though sounding much younger, and that of an 18-year-old. The sudden cry made my monster freeze, and slowly he turned to face me. In his claws he held the dismantled remains of some sort of corpse. Its stinking brown blood stained his fur. When he saw me, he grinned with a new set of razor-sharp teeth. The smell of Deca breezed out of his mouth, and I found myself gawking at the bits of flesh that dangled from in between his fangs. I was a child then, drowning in my adult pajamas and feeling my eyes well up. I stairs. I stumbled back to put space between us and choked back a tiny sob when he reached out for my hand. "Why?" I pleaded, overtaken with fear as he drew up to a much her height and loomed over me. "Because," he answered. It was the first time I had heard his voice, yet I knew that he did not sound that way. He spoke in a low rumble, wrong and inhuman, like something ancient and not of our world. "You grew up." Again, he held his hand out with splayed-open claws, but I did not take it. I shoved him away and went scurrying over the bodies below. making my way towards the gateway as quickly as I could. I awoke in my room with my mother standing over me, demanding to know why I was screaming in my sleep and if I needed to go to the hospital. I'm 23 now and haven't had the dreams since, and if I'm being honest, I don't think I ever will. I still think about them from time to time, musing about it to my husband and friends. They always shake their heads at me, laughing and reminding me that nobody remembers things like that at such young ages. It must have been one dream, all thought up at once and made to feel as though I had been recurring, but I know that's not the case. I still remember